What if I told you that every time a student paid rent in Birmingham, they might have been funding a heroin empire worth £17 million? Picture this. Rows of ordinary student houses in Selly Oak, a busy gym where families work out together, a popular restaurant serving traditional Pakistani cuisine. Normal, everyday places where normal, everyday people live their lives. Now imagine discovering that every brick in those buildings, every mortgage payment, every business license was purchased with money from heroin smuggled into the UK. That the rent you paid to study, the meal you enjoyed with your family, the gym membership you used to stay healthy, all of it was built on a foundation of drugs, addiction, and human misery. How many times have you rented a property, bought from a local business, or used a gym without questioning where the money really goes? How many times have you assumed that successful landlords and business owners earn their wealth through hard work and legitimate enterprise? This story will change how you see every landlord, every local business, every property investment around you. Because what you're about to hear isn't just about crime. It's about the complete betrayal of community trust, the weaponization of ordinary business, and how criminals can hide in plain sight by becoming the very people we depend on most. If you think you can spot a criminal operation, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story will shatter every assumption you have about who you can trust in your own community. What happens when criminals become businessmen and drug money becomes legitimate property? What drives people to build empires on others' suffering while wearing the mask of respectability? And how does a heroin trafficking network become so sophisticated that it operates like a legitimate property development company? The answers lie in the story of Amiran Zeb Khan and his associates, who turned Birmingham and Northern Ireland into the headquarters of one of Britain's most audacious money laundering operations. This is the story of 59 properties, £17 million in criminal assets, and the devastating moment when entire communities realized they'd been unwitting participants in their own destruction.
Meet the face of respectability in Birmingham's property market. Amiran Zeb Khan didn't look like a criminal mastermind. He looked like what he wanted everyone to believe he was. A successful immigrant businessman who'd worked his way up from nothing to build a property empire that stretched across the Midlands and into Northern Ireland. The numbers were impressive by any standard. 59 properties scattered across Birmingham and beyond. 34 student houses in the desirable Selly Oak area, where thousands of university students trusted him with their housing needs. Industrial units that provided legitimate businesses with affordable workspace. A gym where families came to stay healthy and build community connections. Restaurants like the Taj Tandoori, where neighbors gathered to enjoy authentic Pakistani cuisine and celebrate the success of local immigrant entrepreneurs. On paper, it was a textbook success story. Khan and his associates, Muhammad Ali, Sarjeed Hussain, and a carefully cultivated network of relatives and trusted friends had seemingly cracked the code of property investment. They understood the student rental market, they knew how to identify undervalued commercial properties, and they had the business acumen to diversify into hospitality and fitness. But here's what made Khan's operation truly brilliant in its deception. Every property was purchased under someone else's name. Relatives, associates, trusted friends, a complex web of ownership that ensured no direct paper trail led back to the actual decision-makers. To anyone investigating, it would appear to be a collection of separate, unrelated property investments by different people who just happened to know each other. The community embraced them. Students felt fortunate to find affordable housing near campus. Gym members appreciated having a local fitness center that understood their cultural needs. Restaurant customers became regulars, building relationships with staff and owners who seemed genuinely invested in the community's well-being. Local authorities saw exactly what Khan wanted them to see: successful integration, job creation, tax revenue, and community investment. Here were immigrants who not only achieved the British dream, but were actively contributing to the economic growth of their adopted home. Politicians probably praised them as examples of successful multiculturalism. Business organizations might have held them up as models of entrepreneurial achievement. The rent kept flowing from student properties, providing steady monthly income that justified the investments. The businesses operated normally, serving real customers with real products and services. The industrial units housed legitimate companies that paid their leases on time. Everything looked not just legal, but exemplary. What the community couldn't see was the shadow network that made it all possible. Behind every property purchase was a calculation not based on market analysis or business fundamentals, but on how much heroin had successfully entered the UK that month. Behind every business expansion was not reinvested profits, but freshly laundered drug money that needed legitimate channels. The most chilling part was how seamlessly it all worked. Students studying for their futures were unknowingly living in buildings funded by the very drugs that might destroy their classmates. Families building their health at Khan's gym were exercising in a facility purchased with money that devastated other families through addiction. Khan had created the perfect crime, a criminal empire that provided genuine value to its victims, making them willing participants in their own exploitation while never knowing the true cost of their trust.
While Birmingham families were enjoying meals at the Taj Tandoori and students were settling into their Selly Oak flats, the true foundation of Khan's empire was being constructed thousands of miles away in Pakistan. This wasn't a local operation that had grown successful. This was an international criminal network disguised as a property business, with tentacles reaching from Pakistani heroin producers to British student housing. The sophistication of the operation was staggering. Khan and his network had established relationships with heroin suppliers in Pakistan who could provide industrial quantities of pure drugs. Not the street-level amounts that local dealers handle, but shipment-scale quantities measured in hundreds of kilograms. This wasn't opportunistic crime. This was criminal entrepreneurship on a scale that would impress legitimate multinational corporations. The importation method was a masterpiece of concealment. Shipping containers filled with industrial machinery would arrive at British ports, complete with proper documentation, customs declarations, and all the paperwork that legitimate importers use daily. But hidden within that machinery, welded into hollow spaces, concealed in false compartments, integrated so seamlessly that casual inspection would reveal nothing, were packages of pure heroin worth millions on British streets. Think about the level of coordination this required. Pakistani suppliers had to modify industrial equipment without compromising its apparent functionality. British receiving operations needed facilities capable of safely extracting drugs from machinery while maintaining the equipment's legitimate appearance. The network needed corrupt shipping contacts, reliable transportation, and secure storage facilities, all while ensuring that every step looked completely normal to outside observers. Muhammad Ali and Sarjid Hussain weren't just Khan's associates, they were co-architects of a criminal logistics network that operated like a legitimate import-export business. They created fake companies with convincing business histories, established shipping relationships with real logistics providers, and maintained paperwork trails that would satisfy customs inspections and financial audits. But here's what makes this story so devastating. Every successful heroin shipment meant more families destroyed by addiction, more communities ravaged by drug-related crime, more young lives lost to overdoses. The Pakistani heroin that funded Birmingham student housing was simultaneously destroying Birmingham families. The drugs that paid for gym memberships were creating addicts who would never again have the health to exercise. Are you shocked by how sophisticated this operation was? Let me know in the comments what you think drives people to build empires on others' suffering, because understanding these motivations might be the key to preventing the next tragedy. The money laundering cycle was equally brilliant in its simplicity. Heroin profits would flow back through the network, but instead of being spent on obvious criminal luxuries, they were invested in the most boring, legitimate assets imaginable: rental properties, small businesses, industrial units, assets that generated ongoing income, provided tax-deductible expenses, and created perfect justification for large cash transactions. Khan understood something that many criminals miss. The best way to hide criminal money isn't to spend it on flashy cars and jewelry, but to turn it into boring, productive assets that make more money legitimately. Every property purchased with heroin profits would generate rental income for years, providing a steady stream of clean money that further legitimized the operation. The network had created a perfect feedback loop. Heroin profits bought properties. Properties generated rental income. Rental income justified more property purchases, and the growing property empire provided ever better cover for importing more heroin. Each successful cycle made the operation more legitimate-looking and more profitable, while simultaneously making it more devastating to the communities it was exploiting. By 2011, what had started as a heroin trafficking operation had evolved into something much more dangerous: a criminal network so deeply integrated into legitimate commerce that it was virtually indistinguishable from honest business success. Khan wasn't just a drug dealer anymore. He was a landlord, a business owner, a community member whose success story inspired others while hiding a foundation of unprecedented community betrayal.
By the peak of their operation, Khan's network had achieved something that most legitimate property developers would envy: a diversified portfolio spanning multiple property types, geographic regions, and business sectors, all generating steady income while maintaining perfect legal cover. The scale was breathtaking. 59 properties worth £17 million, strategically distributed to maximize both profit and legitimacy. The student housing operation in Selly Oak alone was an empire within the empire. 34 properties filled with university students who trusted Khan's network with their safety, their comfort, and their education experience. Picture these young people, away from home for the first time, excited about their futures, studying for careers that would benefit society, and every month their rent payments were feeding money back into a network that was simultaneously poisoning their communities with heroin. The emotional weight of this betrayal is almost unbearable. These weren't just financial transactions. They were relationships built on trust. Students would call Khan's associates when radiators broke or locks needed fixing. They'd recommend the properties to friends, helping expand the network's reach. They'd defend their landlords against criticism, appreciating what seemed like fair treatment and reasonable rents. The industrial units told a similar story of perverted legitimacy. Real businesses operated from Khan's properties, employing real people, serving real customers, contributing to the local economy. These legitimate tenants had no idea that their lease payments were helping fund one of Britain's largest heroin operations. Their honest work was being used to justify and disguise criminal enterprise on an unimaginable scale. The gym represented perhaps the most cynical aspect of the operation. Here was a facility dedicated to health and community well-being, funded by drugs that destroyed health and communities. Families would bring their children to learn about fitness and discipline, never knowing that the membership fees they paid were cycling through a network that created the very addictions that devastated other families in their neighborhoods.
The Taj Tandoori restaurant added another layer of community integration that made the operation virtually undetectable. This wasn't just money laundering, this was cultural bridge building funded by cultural destruction. The restaurant served as a gathering place where Pakistani immigrants could maintain connections to their heritage while integrating into British society. Customers felt they were supporting successful integration and multicultural community building. In reality, they were dining in a facility purchased with profits from an operation that exploited and destroyed the very communities it claimed to serve. The geographic expansion into Northern Ireland showed the network's growing confidence and sophistication. This wasn't just about Birmingham anymore. Khan's operation was becoming a regional criminal enterprise with national implications. Properties in Northern Ireland provided both diversification and additional layers of legal complexity that made investigation more difficult. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the empire at its peak was how normal everything seemed. Rent got paid on time. Properties were maintained properly. Businesses provided good service. Industrial tenants were satisfied with their facilities. From the outside, this looked like exactly what successful property investment should look like: stable, profitable, community-oriented, and well-managed. The human stories behind these statistics are heartbreaking. Think about the student who chose Khan's property because it felt safe and well-maintained, never knowing that her housing security was built on others' addiction and misery. Consider the small business owner who rented industrial space, grateful for affordable rates that allowed his legitimate enterprise to thrive, unaware that his success was entangled with criminal operations. The most devastating realization is how many people were unknowing participants in their own community's destruction. Every satisfied customer, every positive recommendation, every rent payment made on time was helping Khan's network grow stronger and more sophisticated. The very success of the legitimate businesses was providing better cover for the criminal operations that funded them. Khan had achieved something that criminal organizations rarely manage. He had made his victims into willing collaborators who actively worked to protect and expand his operation. Students recommended his properties to friends, helping him recruit new victims. Restaurant customers brought their families, expanding the network of people whose trust was being exploited. Gym members praised the facility to neighbors, drawing more people into the web of unknowing participation. By 2011, the network wasn't just operating successfully, it was thriving, growing, and becoming more deeply embedded in legitimate commerce with each passing month. Khan had created a criminal organization that looked indistinguishable from honest entrepreneurial success, making it virtually immune to detection through normal law enforcement methods. What Khan didn't realize was that success on this scale, even when perfectly disguised, creates patterns that sophisticated investigators can eventually detect. The empire that seemed unshakable was about to face scrutiny that would expose every carefully hidden connection and ultimately bring the entire operation crashing down.
In 2011, something caught the attention of investigators in Northern Ireland that would eventually unravel one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations Britain had ever seen. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, just a pattern in property ownership that didn't quite make sense to analysts studying regional real estate markets. Multiple properties were being purchased in Northern Ireland by individuals with limited apparent income sources, but the purchases were being made with large cash deposits and funded through financial arrangements that seemed unusually favorable for the buyer's declared economic circumstances. On its own, this might have been explained by family money, inheritance, or legitimate business success. But the pattern was too consistent, too coordinated, and too geographically concentrated to be coincidental. The National Crime Agency's Civil Recovery Team began what would become a years-long investigation into suspicious asset acquisition. Their job wasn't to prove criminal activity, it was to demonstrate that assets had been acquired through means that couldn't be justified by legitimate income. This approach allowed them to target the money without necessarily proving exactly how it was earned, a crucial advantage when dealing with sophisticated laundering operations. What investigators discovered in those early months was both fascinating and alarming. Properties were being purchased under multiple names by individuals who seemed to have family or community connections, but who weren't obviously wealthy enough to be major property investors. The purchases showed coordination and planning that suggested professional organization rather than individual opportunity. Financial analysis revealed payment patterns that didn't match normal property investment behavior. Large cash payments were common, but they came through channels that made it difficult to trace the ultimate source of the funds. Banking relationships were complex, involving multiple accounts and institutions in ways that created legitimate-looking paper trails while obscuring the actual flow of money. The investigation expanded from Northern Ireland back to the West Midlands, where the property pattern was even more extensive and sophisticated. Birmingham's property records revealed a network of acquisitions that dwarfed what had been discovered in Northern Ireland. 59 properties, multiple business acquisitions, and a level of coordinated activity that clearly indicated professional criminal organization. But property records alone weren't enough to prove criminal activity. Investigators needed to connect the suspicious assets to actual criminal operations, and that required a completely different type of investigation. The civil recovery team began working with drug enforcement specialists to see if there were any connections between the property network and known trafficking operations. The breakthrough came in 2014, when Border Force officers intercepted a shipping container that would change everything. Inside industrial machinery being imported through what appeared to be a legitimate business transaction, they discovered 165 kilograms of pure heroin, with a street value approaching £19 million. This wasn't just a drug bust, it was the missing piece that connected years of suspicious property acquisitions to their criminal source. The seizure triggered Operation Sandwell Sting, an intensive surveillance operation targeting the network connected to the intercepted shipment. Investigators watched as members of Khan's organization attempted to retrieve their drugs, documenting not just their criminal activity, but their connections to the property empire that had first attracted attention in Northern Ireland. What happened in the surveillance operation was precisely what investigators needed: direct evidence linking the heroin trafficking network to the individuals whose names appeared on property documents across Birmingham and Northern Ireland. The connection between drugs and properties, between criminal profits and legitimate assets, was finally provable in court. If this investigation is as gripping for you as it was for me, please share this story, because these are the hidden truths that need to be exposed in our communities. The investigation had evolved from suspicious property patterns to a comprehensive understanding of how one of Britain's most successful criminal networks had operated for years under perfect legal cover. Every property purchase, every business acquisition, every seemingly legitimate transaction was revealed as part of a coordinated money laundering operation that had exploited community trust on an unprecedented scale. The stage was set for coordinated raids that would finally bring Khan's empire crashing down and expose the full scope of one of the Midlands' most audacious criminal operations.
The coordinated raids of 2017 marked the end of Khan's carefully constructed world of legitimate respectability. Picture the shock as armed police surrounded properties across Birmingham and Northern Ireland simultaneously. Not just raiding drug houses, but student accommodations, business premises, and family homes that had seemed completely normal to their neighbors and communities. For Khan, the moment of arrest must have been devastating in ways beyond just losing his freedom. Years of careful cultivation of respectability, decades of building trust with communities, students, and business partners, all revealed as elaborate deception in a single morning. The quiet property magnate was exposed as the mastermind behind one of Britain's most sophisticated heroin operations. The evidence presented at Birmingham Crown Court painted a picture of criminal organization that shocked even experienced prosecutors. This wasn't just drug dealing or simple money laundering. This was criminal entrepreneurship that had successfully integrated into legitimate commerce so completely that thousands of people had been unknowing participants in their own community's exploitation. The prosecution methodically connected every element of the operation. Heroin shipments from Pakistan linked to specific property purchases, business acquisitions timed with successful drug importations, the careful use of relatives' names to obscure ownership while maintaining control, the creation of legitimate businesses that served real customers while laundering criminal profits. The sentences reflected not just the scale of the criminal operation, but the profound breach of community trust that Khan's network had perpetrated. A combined 139 years in prison for the various members of the network sent a clear message about the consequences of exploiting community relationships for criminal purposes. For Khan personally, the sentence represented the complete destruction of everything he'd spent years building. Not just his criminal empire, but his reputation, his relationships, his standing in the communities that had trusted and respected him. The successful businessman, revealed as a criminal mastermind, faced not just imprisonment, but the knowledge that his deception had damaged the very communities he'd claimed to serve. The asset seizures were equally comprehensive. The $17 million property empire was dismantled, with properties transferred from criminal ownership to legitimate authorities. The gym, the restaurants, the student housing, all of it removed from the network that had used these community assets as weapons against the community itself. For the communities affected, the revelations brought a mixture of justice satisfaction and profound betrayal trauma. Students realized they'd been unknowingly funding heroin operations through their rent payments. Restaurant customers understood that their family dinners had been served in criminal-funded facilities. Gym members faced the reality that their health and fitness activities had been subsidizing community destruction. The business premises that had housed legitimate companies were freed from their criminal connections, allowing honest businesses to operate without unknowingly supporting drug trafficking. Industrial tenants could finally operate with the confidence that their lease payments were going to legitimate property owners rather than criminal networks. But perhaps most importantly, the investigation and prosecution provided a roadmap for identifying similar operations in other communities. The methods Khan had used, the property diversification, the use of relatives' names, the integration of legitimate and criminal business, became known patterns that investigators could recognize and disrupt before they reached such devastating scale. Justice had been served, but the scars left by years of systematic community betrayal would take much longer to heal.
As this devastating story reaches its conclusion, we're left with profound questions about trust, community, and how we protect ourselves from those who would exploit our fundamental decency for criminal gain. Khan's operation succeeded not because communities were careless, but because they did exactly what healthy communities should do. They welcomed successful businesses, supported local entrepreneurs, and trusted their neighbors. The lesson here isn't that we should become suspicious of every successful business or immigrant entrepreneur. That would destroy the social fabric that makes communities strong and welcoming. Instead, we need to understand how sophisticated criminal operations exploit our trust and develop better systems for identifying suspicious patterns without destroying legitimate opportunity. The property empire warning signs are crucial for everyone to understand. Rapid property acquisition without obvious income sources, multiple properties purchased under different names within the same network, and cash transactions that seem inconsistent with declared business income. These patterns should trigger community awareness without creating paranoia about legitimate success. The human cost reality cuts deepest. Students and families weren't just victims of financial crime. They were manipulated into becoming unwitting participants in their own community's destruction. Every rent payment, every business transaction, Every positive recommendation helped strengthen the very network that was simultaneously poisoning their neighborhoods with heroin. But perhaps the most important lesson is about community resilience. Birmingham's neighborhoods didn't collapse after Khan's network was exposed. Instead, they demonstrated the strength that comes from facing truth honestly and working together to rebuild trust. Legitimate businesses replaced criminal fronts. Honest landlords took over student housing. Real community investment replaced exploitation disguised as investment. The possibility of healing proves that criminals like Khan can damage communities but can't destroy them permanently. When people work together to identify, expose, and remove criminal operations, they create something stronger than what existed before. Communities that are both welcoming and vigilant, trusting but not naive. If you found value in this story about hidden criminal empires and community resilience, subscribe for more true crime documentaries that reveal the patterns we need to recognize to protect ourselves and our neighbors. Comment below with your thoughts on how communities can stay welcoming while remaining alert to sophisticated criminal operations, and share this story widely, because understanding how criminals exploit community trust might be the key to preventing the next 17 million pound betrayal in your own neighborhood. This has been Dark Truth Files, uncovering the hidden truths that shape our communities and the lessons that can help us build stronger, safer places for everyone who chooses to call them home.